Sweatshop labor, exploitation of the poor, or opportunity in the third world. Let's be honest. We Americans love a good bargain. We hunt for sales, big sales. In fact, the bigger the better. 25% off, 50% off, red tag sale, buy one, get one free. We are expert consumers, able to stuff shopping bags until they overflow with gadgets, trinkets, clothes, and jewelry. When we find a great deal, we're not satisfied to simply buy. We brag. We will share the tales of our enormously successful adventures in bargain hunting with our relatives, friends, and coworkers. If asked where we found such incredible deals, we sing the praises of whichever outlet, supercenter, or website graciously slashed their prices for the benefit of our pocketbook. However, the question we generally fail to ask is, where in the world retailers manage to get such great deals? What could possibly allow them to make a profit at such incredibly low prices? Certainly, the wholesale supplier must be offering low prices on the items stored in their warehouse, which in turn allows retailers to pass the unbelievable savings along to us. But where do such savings begin? Eventually, as one works backward through the supply chain, it becomes obvious how important low production costs are in order for manufacturers and retailers to compete in today's marketplace. Where are such low production costs found? Welcome to the world market. We'll use shoes as an example. Without trade, both the quantity of shoes made and the price of shoes are determined by the simple law of supply and demand. The blue line in this graph represents the domestic demand curve. As we can see, the quantity of shoes people are willing to buy is inversely related to the price they are willing to pay. Simply put, the cheaper they are, the more they buy. Now, the red line shows that the opposite applies to the domestic supply curve. In this curve, we see the manufacturers are willing to make more shoes as the price goes up. Where the two lines meet sets the equilibrium for both the price for shoes and the quantity to be made and sold. This is a natural phenomenon and does not need regulation to take place. This is just where things settle on their own. But now let's open ourselves up to international trade. Because the United States makes up only a fraction of the total world market, we have little effect on the world supply curve, shown in purple here. When this new supply source is applied to our domestic supply and demand, we see two new points of intersection. Q1 shows what U.S. manufacturers are willing to produce at this price, and Q2 shows what amount consumers are willing to buy at this price. So how do we come up with the difference, this area between the two? Imports. In short, by trading with other countries around the world, American companies can find deals that aren't available within the United States. While we shift our resources to provide the services and goods that we are best at, like making airplanes and movies, we can buy more shoes for less money from factories in countries that are better at making shoes and clothing with cheap labor. In other words, sweatshops. While we in the U.S. have fairly well-enforced labor laws, minimum wage, and unions to protect the interest of workers, sweatshops are known for hard labor for little wages. Women and children are packed into third world factories which are well publicized for their harsh treatment of workers. So, what exactly is wrong with sweatshops? I mean, hard work never hurt anybody, right? Well, let's look at some select points found on www.dosomething.org in regards to sweatshop labor. 1. Sweatshop is defined by the U.S. Department of Labor as a factory that violates two or more labor laws. 2. Sweatshops often have poor working conditions, unfair wages, unreasonable hours, child labor, and a lack of benefits for workers. 3. In developing countries, an estimated 250 million children ages 5 to 14 are forced to work. 4. According to the National Labor Committee, women sewing NBA jerseys make 24 cents per garment that will eventually sell for $140. 5. Men and women alike are subjected to verbal, physical, and sexual abuse in factories from their managers and supervisors. They are sometimes trapped in the factory and forced to work overnight or across multiple shifts. And finally, 6. Because women make up 85 to 90% of the sweatshop workers, employers force them to take birth control and routine pregnancy tests to avoid supporting maternity leave or providing appropriate health benefits. In summary, these are terrible places to work. Workers, primarily women and children, are overworked and abused for pay that is a small fraction of what someone in the U.S. would receive earning only minimum wage. So why then are people willing to work under such terrible conditions? Well, Benjamin Powell and David Scarbeck looked into that very subject in an Independent Institute working paper entitled Sweatshops and Third World Living Standards. Are the jobs worth the sweat? In this report, they summarized their work by stating, "We find that most sweatshop jobs provide an above-average standard of living for their workers." Could this be true? How much are people earning in these sweatshops? Now, if we look at this table from the book Globalization and the Poor by J.R. Mandel, the picture seems bleak. With international wages for apparel workers ranging from $2.38 to as little as 13 cents per hour, it's hard to imagine anyone being able to survive on such apparently minuscule amounts of money. But that's looking at the numbers through the tainted lens of Western living standards. How do these wages compare with income averages within each of these nations? Considering that the average apparel factory employee works about 70 hours per week, they can expect to earn anywhere from just over the national average to well over 7 times more. But to be fair, these averages can be skewed if you consider that unemployed people in these impoverished nations were included in the numbers. So let's look at the same comparison amongst workers only. Even now, in 8 out of 10 nations, apparel factory employees exceed the national average for income. So what are the two that fall below the average? Bangladesh and Indonesia. Are they destined to starve? Well, let's look closer at what constitutes a living wage. Here we can see what percentage of the population in each country is living on less than $2 a day, along with those living on less than $1 a day. Now, let's focus on one of the countries where apparel workers fall well below the national average for workers' wages, Indonesia. Here we see that over half the population is surviving on less than $2 per day. Now let's look more specifically at what wages are being paid by U.S. companies in these third world countries. Since we've been talking about shoes, we'll focus on the 2002 wages paid by Nike to workers in Indonesia. The 27-cent wage is actually 7 cents less than the average apparel worker's wage we saw earlier. What kind of income is provided by this wage? Well, at 27 cents per hour, and considering that the average apparel worker in Indonesia works 70 hours per week, we can see that they would be earning $18.90 every week. Now, if we divide that by 7 days, it's apparent that they are earning about $2.70 every day on average. This means that they are living better than over half the rest of the population. Definitely a living wage, even if it's not much of one. While it's obvious from our earlier list that there are a lot of things wrong with sweatshops, the question remains, what do we do? What happens when we fight against the use of sweatshops? When a nation suffers from unemployment and poverty, eliminating jobs is not what the doctor ordered. In a New York Times article called "Let Them Sweat," Nicholas D. Kristof explains what sweatshop protests from Western society ultimately result in. He writes, Nike used to have 2 contract factories in impoverished Cambodia, among the neediest countries in the world. Then there was an outcry after BBC reported that 3 girls in one factory were under 15 years old. So Nike fled controversy by ceasing production in Cambodia. The result was that some of the 2,000 Cambodians, 90% of them young women, who worked in those factories faced layoffs. Some of those who lost their jobs probably were ensnared in Cambodia's huge sex slave industry, which leaves many girls dead of AIDS by the end of their teenage years. Basically, it's out of the frying pan and into the fire. In conclusion, sweatshops are bad places to work, real bad. But when the alternatives are starvation or slavery, the sweatshop may be, for now anyway, a necessary evil. If we are to take action in order to influence others to change the working conditions in third world countries, we must do so cautiously. Shutting down these places will do more harm than good, so change must begin inside the sweatshop, much the same way workers' rights have developed over time in the United States. Sweatshops provide income, and for those countries with few exportable goods, offer a chance for economic growth that would ultimately benefit everyone throughout the nation, as well as around the world.